Hey guys, tonight we are stepping back into a world where the air is so cold it feels like it might crack if you spoke too loudly. You are standing on a dark, rocky shore in the north, watching the grey waves of the Atlantic crash against the jagged coast of Norway. The wind is a living thing here, a sharp, biting force that pulls the moisture from your skin and turns your breath into a thick, swirling ghost. You probably believe this was a life of constant shivering, where everyone spent their nights huddled under a thin blanket, hoping to see the sunrise without turning into a human ice sculpture. You might imagine these legendary warriors lived in drafty wooden shacks that felt like walking into a modern walk-in freezer, with the wind whistling through every crack in the wall. But the truth is, while the world outside was a frozen desert of ice and snow, the inside of a Viking village was a masterpiece of cozy engineering. These buildings weren't just houses, they were giant, wooden ribbed cocoons wrapped in thick, protective blankets of earth and grass. Before you get too comfortable and possibly fall asleep halfway through, tap like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this odd mix of boredom and history. It keeps the channel alive and the stories just sleepy enough to help you drift off again next time. If you're listening while tucked in, or perhaps finishing up some late night chores, tell me where you are in the world and what time it is for you. I love seeing how far these stories travel, while most of us are trying to find the cool side of the pillow. Now, dim the lights, let the world outside grow quiet, and turn on a fan if you like that soft, steady hum in the background. Let your shoulders loosen and your breathing slow. This is your time to drift. No rush, no deadlines, no noise. Just you, a little warmth in the air, and the faint whisper of history waiting to unfold. So, settle in, and let's ease gently into tonight's journey together. As you stand in the deepening twilight of a Viking winter, your boots sink into a crust of frozen snow. The sound of the ice breaking under your weight is muffled and dry, a soft protest from the earth itself. Ahead of you, the village doesn't look like a collection of buildings so much as a group of small, sleeping hills. These are the Longhouses, the architectural heartbeat of the Norse world. They are long, low, and heavy, designed to hug the ground and hide from the wind. In your modern life, you might be used to thin walls and central heating that clicks on with a digital beep. But here, warmth is something that must be built by hand, layer by layer, with the very skin of the earth. You walk toward the nearest structure, and you notice that the walls aren't made of simple planks of wood. Instead, they are massive embankments of turf and stone, nearly 2 meters thick in some places. Building a home like this was not a weekend project or something you could order from a catalog. It was a slow, rhythmic labor that required the cooperation of the entire community. You imagine the families heading out into the marshy lowlands during the damp days of autumn, using sharp iron spades to cut long, rectangular strips of sod from the ground. The turf here is special. It is a dense weave of grass roots, moss, and rich, peaty soil. When these strips are cut and stacked, the roots continue to cling to one another, knitting the wall into a solid, organic mass. You see the way the layers are placed, alternating like a giant, earthy puzzle. This is the secret to their survival. While a wooden wall might eventually rot or let the breeze through, a turf wall is a natural insulator. It is heavy, solid, and incredibly slow to change temperature. If you think your apartment is drafty, try living inside a 3-foot thick wall of compressed grass and roots. The wind simply gives up before it can find a way through. The skeleton of the house is where the true craftsmanship shows. Beneath that heavy blanket of earth, there is a frame of massive timber beams. You look at the dark, seasoned wood of the upright posts that hold the weight of the world on their shoulders. These are often made of oak or pine, selected for their strength and their ability to withstand the damp. The Vikings were master shipbuilders, and they brought that same expertise to their homes. The way the beams curve inward at the top reminds you of the hull of a ship, turned upside down. Historians still argue whether the specific curvature of the walls was for aerodynamics to deflect the gale, force winds, or simply a stylistic choice following the familiar shape of a ship. Whatever the reason, the result is a space that feels sturdy and protective, like being inside a great wooden ribcage. The timber isn't just for show, it is the skeleton that allows the house to breathe and flex. You notice that there are no nails in the joints. Instead, the wood is joined by clever pegs and notches, allowing the structure to shift slightly when the weight of the winter snow builds up on the roof. This flexibility is what kept these houses standing for generations. You reach out and touch the wood, feeling the rough texture of the bark and the smooth, hand-carved planes where the adze has shaped the timber. There is a faint scent of pine resin and old smoke clinging to the surface, a smell that speaks of centuries of fires and long, dark nights. It is a grounding sensation, a reminder that every piece of this house was handled and shaped by someone who knew their life depended on its strength. Your eyes travel upward toward the roof, which is perhaps the most impressive part of the entire construction. It isn't just a covering, it is a living ecosystem. Layers of birch bark are laid down first, acting as a natural waterproof membrane. Birch bark is remarkable stuff, full of oils that repel water even after the tree has been dead for years. Over this, more layers of turf are placed, often with the grass still growing. By the middle of winter, this roof will be covered in a deep layer of snow, which adds even more insulation. It is a strange thought, but the snow itself helps keep the house warm by trapping a layer of air between the ice and the turf. Sometimes, in the spring, you might even see a stray goat grazing on the roof of a longhouse, munching on the fresh green shoots that have sprouted in the high, sunny patch of earth. Mainstream historical facts tell us that these longhouses were often 30 meters long, though some spectacular examples found at sites, like Borg in the Lofoten Islands, reached nearly 80 meters in length. Imagine a building the size of a modern passenger jet, built entirely of wood and earth, glowing with a soft light in the middle of a frozen wasteland. It is a majestic sight, a testament to the fact that the Norse people didn't just survive the cold, they mastered it. They understood that to stay warm, you had to embrace the earth. You couldn't just build on top of it, you had to build with it. A quirky tidbit that many people forget is that the Vikings often stuffed the smaller cracks in their timber frames with raw sheep's wool or dried moss. It was a primitive form of caulking that worked surprisingly well. You can almost see the children of the village being sent out to gather the tufts of wool caught on brambles, bringing them back so their fathers could jam the soft fibers into the gaps. where the winter air might try to sneak in. It was a constant process of maintenance, a rhythmic dance with the seasons. Every year, you would check the walls, pat down the turf, and ensure the birch bark was still holding firm. It was a house that required care, but in return, it offered a level of silence and warmth that a modern house might struggle to match. As you move closer to the entrance, the roar of the wind begins to fade, replaced by a deep, heavy stillness. The door is low, so low that you have to duck your head to enter. This wasn't because the Vikings were short. In fact, they were often quite tall for the time. The door was small to minimize the amount of precious heat that could escape when someone entered or left. It is a physical reminder that in this world, every degree of warmth is a hard-won treasure. You step through the threshold, moving into a small, dark vestibule. This area acts like an airlock in a spaceship, a transition zone where you can shake the snow from your cloak and stomp the ice from your boots before entering the main hall. The transition is immediate. The air in the vestibule is still cold, but the violence of the wind is gone. You feel the pressure change in your ears as the thick walls swallow the noise of the storm. The darkness here is soft, not frightening. It is the darkness of a burrow or a den. You take a moment to let your eyes adjust, breathing in the scent of damp earth and the lingering hint of something savory cooking further inside. You feel the weight of your own wool clothing, which has grown heavy with the mist. But as you stand in this protected space, you know that the cold cannot follow you any further. The massive turf embankments are holding the Arctic at bay, creating a pocket of stillness in a world of chaos. You run your hand along the interior of the wall. Here, the turf is often lined with wooden planks or woven wattle to keep the dirt from crumbling into the living space. It feels cool to the touch, but not freezing. The thermal mass of the earth is doing its job, soaking up the heat from the interior and reflecting it back. It is a slow, steady process. A longhouse takes a long time to warm up, but once it is warm, it stays warm for a very long time. It is a patient kind of architecture, built for a people who understood the long, slow rhythm of the northern winter. You think about the contrast between the world you just left and the one you are about to enter. Outside, the stars are probably sharp and bright over the frozen fjords, and the aurora borealis might be dancing in silent ribbons of green and purple. But here, the focus is entirely inward. The world has shrunk to the size of this great hall. There are no windows to let the heat out or the cold in. Light comes only from the fire and the small, flickering oil lamps. It is an intimate, enclosed world where the boundaries between the family and the earth are blurred. You feel a sense of profound safety, a primal comfort that comes from knowing there are 2 meters of solid earth between you and the howling wilderness. Your modern mind might find the ideal of living in a dirt house unappealing, but there is an undeniable luxury in this level of insulation. There are no drafts pulling at your neck, no rattling window panes, no hum of a furnace struggling to keep up with the thermometer. There is only the silence of the turf and the strength of the oak. It is a house that feels like an extension of the landscape, a natural outcrop that just happens to have a hearth at its center. You take a deep breath, and for the first time in hours, your chest doesn't tighten from the cold. The air is thick and still, carrying the promise of the fire that awaits you in the next room. You move forward, guided by the faint, golden glow spilling from the main chamber. The floor beneath your feet is hard, packed clay, swept clean and covered in a fresh layer of rushes or straw. It feels firm and stable, a solid foundation for the life that happens within these walls. You realize that the floor, too, is part of the heating system. The earth beneath the house stays at a constant temperature, preventing the frost from rising up through the ground. Every element of this building, from the stones in the foundation to the grass on the roof, is working in harmony to create a sanctuary. As you prepare to step into the heart of the Longhouse, you feel a sense of gratitude for the ancient hands that stacked these sods and hewed these beams. They didn't have the luxury of modern technology, but they had a deep, intuitive understanding of the materials at their disposal. They knew how to listen to the wind and how to use the earth as a shield. If you think your life is complicated, try to imagine the simple, singular focus of building a wall that can withstand a Viking winter. It is a task that requires patience, strength, and a quiet sort of wisdom. You lean against the heavy timber of the inner doorway, letting the last of the outside world fall away. The sound of the wind is now just a faint, distant whisper, like the sound of the ocean in a seashell. It is a background noise that only serves to emphasize the quiet of the interior. You are safe. You are warm. The Longhouse has taken you in, wrapping you in its earthy embrace. The journey into the heart of the winter has only just begun, but here, inside the secret of the turf walls, the ice has no power over you. You find yourself sinking into the rhythm of the house, your breathing slowing to match the steady, silent pulse of the earth. The night is long, but the walls are thick, and the history of this place is just beginning to unfold around you like a well-worn blanket. The way the light plays across the texture of the woven wall hangings catches your eye. These aren't just for decoration. They add another layer of insulation, trapping a pocket of air between the fabric and the wood. Every choice made in this space was a choice for survival. You notice the way the light softens the edges of the room, turning the massive timber posts into guardians that stand watch over the sleeping household. There is a sense of timelessness here, a feeling that this house has stood for 100 winters and will stand for 100 more. The air is heavy with the scent of the seasons. Dried herbs hanging from the rafters, the earthy smell of the floor, and the rich, oily scent of the wool. It is a sensory tapestry that anchors you to the moment, pulling you deeper into the cozy reality of the Viking village. You take one last look back at the small, dark entrance, a tiny portal to a cold world that no longer seems to matter. You are home, even if this home belongs to a time 1,000 years before your own. You step further into the Longhouse, and the transition from the earthy silence of the vestibule to the living heart of the home is like a warm hand placed gently on your chest. The air here is different. It is thick, seasoned, and heavy with the scent of 1,000 nights. At the center of this massive, dim hall lies the source of all life in the Viking age, the hearth. This isn't a small, decorative fireplace tucked into a corner like you might find in a modern suburban living room. This is the Longhouse, the long fire, a glowing trench of heat that stretches down the center of the room like a river of molten gold. It is a deep, stone-lined pit, perhaps 5 or 6 meters long, filled with a pulsing bed of embers and dancing orange flames. You walk toward it, and the chill that has been clinging to your bones since the fjords begins to melt away, one slow, delicious inch at a time. The heat from the Langilder doesn't just hit you, it envelopes you. It is a dry, radiant warmth that seems to vibrate through the hard, packed clay floor beneath your feet. You notice that the stones lining the pit are large, heavy river rocks, worn smooth by water and now blackened by decades of soot. These stones are the unsung heroes of the Viking winter. They act as a massive thermal battery, soaking up the intense heat of the flames throughout the day and slowly releasing it long after the fire has been banked for the night. If you think your modern radiator is impressive, consider that these stones could stay warm to the touch until the first light of dawn, providing a steady, gentle heat that keeps the frost from creeping over the threshold. It is a slow motion magic, a way of capturing the sun's energy and holding it captive in the middle of a dark, northern night. You stand by the edge of the pit, watching the way the flames lick at the heavy logs. The wood being burned is mostly slow, growing oak and birch, which provides a steady, reliable heat. But there is another scent mixed in, something deeper and more ancient. In many parts of the Viking world, especially in the treeless reaches of Iceland or the outer islands, wood was a luxury reserved for ships and tools. For the fire, people relied on peat, dense, compressed blocks of ancient bog moss that had been cut and dried in the sun. The smoke from the peat is blue, gray and thick, smelling of old earth, dried heather, and a hint of salt. It is a comforting, heavy smell that tells your brain it is time to stop moving and start resting. You could call it the original aromatherapy, though your modern lungs might have a few choice words about the lack of a proper chimney. As you look up, you see where the smoke goes. There is no brick flue or metal pipe here. Instead, the smoke rises in a lazy, swirling column toward the high, peaked ceiling. It gathers in the rafters, forming a thick, shimmering layer of haze that hangs about 6 feet above the floor. Historians still argue whether the smoke hole in the roof, known as the el-jarri, was always positioned directly above the hearth, or if it was sometimes offset to create a better draft. Whatever the design, the result is a room that is divided into 2 worlds. Below the smoke line, the air is relatively clear and wonderfully warm. Above it, the smoke works its own kind of winter survival magic. You see bundles of dried fish, hams, and sausages hanging from the blackened beams, being slowly cured by the rising heat and the preservative properties of the smoke. It is a giant, walk-in dehydrator that keeps the village's food supply from rotting while simultaneously keeping the residents from freezing. The light in the Longhouse is almost entirely provided by this central fire, and it creates a world of deep, moving shadows. The flames cast long, flickering silhouettes of the massive timber posts against the turf walls, making the house feel like it is breathing. In the corners of the room, far from the reach of the hearth, you might see small, flickering sparks of light from lamp stands holding bowls of fish oil or seal blubber. These lamps are simple, often just a hollowed-out stone or a small ceramic dish with a wick made of dried moss. They don't give off much light, and they certainly don't smell like lavender or vanilla. In fact, they smell quite strongly of a harbor at low tide. But they provide just enough glow to navigate the room. You find yourself drawn back to the hearth, however, because the fire is the only thing that truly matters. It is the television, the heater, and the spiritual center of the world all rolled into one. You notice a large, flat stone near the center of the fire pit where a heavy iron cauldron hangs from a tripod. The liquid inside is bubbling softly, a rhythmic sound that mimics the steady pulse of the house. This is the communal stew, a dish that is never truly finished, but is constantly replenished with whatever is available. Mutton, root vegetables, perhaps a handful of dried herbs. The fire is not just for warmth, it is a tool for transformation. It turns the cold, hard products of the summer harvest into soft, nourishing energy. You feel the steam from the pot touch your face, carrying the scent of wild leeks and fatty broth. It is a reminder that warmth in the Viking Age was an internal experience as much as an external one. To survive the ice, you had to keep the fire burning inside your belly as well as in the pit. Managing a fire of this size was a job of immense responsibility. It wasn't something you just lit with a match and forgot about. You imagine the fire watcher, perhaps an elder or one of the older children, whose job it was to ensure the embers never went out. If the fire died in the middle of a blizzard, it could be a death sentence for the entire household. There is a quiet, meditative art to banking a fire. You see how the ash is carefully raked over the red, hot coals at night, creating a protective blanket that starves the fire of oxygen just enough to keep it smoldering without burning away. In the morning, you only need to blow gently on the hidden sparks and add a few shavings of birch bark to bring the dragon back to life. It is a relationship of constant care, a rhythmic exchange between the humans and the heat. The floor around the hearth is where the most comfortable seats are found. These are the high seats, often carved with intricate patterns of serpents and vines, reserved for the leaders of the household. But tonight, there is room for everyone. You sit down on a low bench covered in a thick, bristly reindeer hide. The fur is incredibly dense, providing another layer of insulation between you and the ground. As you settle in, you feel the way the fire light plays across your skin. It is a soft, orange glow that makes everyone look younger and kinder. The harshness of the outside world, with its biting winds and frozen seas, feels like a dream someone else is having. Here, the only reality is the crackle of the wood and the steady, humming warmth. A mainstream historical fact that often surprises people is that the Vikings didn't just use fire for warmth. They used it for light therapy. In the deep winter of the north, the sun might only appear for a few hours a day, or not at all if you were far enough north. The Longhouse fire provided the full spectrum light and heat necessary to keep seasonal depression at bay. It was the social glue that kept the community together. Without the hearth, the Longhouse would just be a dark, cold tunnel. With it, it is a hall of heroes, a place of stories and laughter. You could call it the original, smart home. Except instead of an app, you have a pile of dry peat and a very sharp iron fire striker. A quirky tidbit that adds to the sensory experience of the hearth is the use of fire stones for boiling water. Sometimes, instead of putting a wooden bucket over the fire, which is obviously a terrible idea if you want to keep the bucket. The Vikings would heat large stones in the embers until they were glowing red. They would then use iron tongs to drop the hot stones directly into a vat of water or milk. You can almost hear the soft, violent hiss as the stone hits the liquid, sending up a cloud of pure, white steam. It was an efficient way to cook without damaging valuable containers, and it added a mineral, earthy taste to everything it touched. It is a reminder that the Vikings were incredibly resourceful, finding ways to make the fire work for them in every possible capacity. You watch as a log shifts in the pit, sending a fountain of tiny, bright sparks spiraling up into the smoke layer. They look like miniature stars, a reflection of the cold cosmos outside, but here they are contained and harmless. The fire has a hypnotic quality. In the silence of the Longhouse, it provides a constant, low-frequency soundtrack. There is the deep, bass thrum of the burning peat, the sharp, percussive snap of the pine sap, and the soft, white noise hiss of the moisture escaping from a fresh log. It is a symphony of safety. You find your eyelids growing heavy as you track the movement of the flames. They dance and twist, never repeating the same shape twice, a living sculpture that has been the focus of human attention since the dawn of time. The heat of the hearth also serves a very practical, if slightly less cozy, purpose. It keeps the insects away. In a house made of turf and wood, you might expect to be overrun by beetles or lice. However, the constant presence of the smoke acts as a natural insecticide. It permeates the grain of the wood and the fibers of the wall hangings, making the Longhouse an inhospitable place for anything with 6 legs. Even the smell of the smoke on your clothes is a badge of protection. When you walk through the village, the scent of the hearth follows you like an invisible cloak, a reminder that you belong to the world of the fire, not the world of the frost. As the night deepens, the fire is allowed to settle into a steady, pulsing glow. The large logs have turned into glowing rectangular blocks of carbon, radiating an intense, even heat. This is the best time to sit by the hearth. The initial excitement of the flames has passed, leaving behind a quiet, powerful warmth that feels like it could last forever. You lean back against the wooden post of the bench, feeling the vibration of the house around you. The Longhouse is a heavy thing, anchored to the earth by its turf walls, and the fire is the heartbeat that keeps it alive. You realize that warmth isn't just a temperature, it's a feeling of being centered. In a world that is mostly ice and dark water, the hearth is the one point of absolute certainty. You think about the people who sat here before you. They would have watched these same flames, felt this same heat on their shins, and smelled this same mixture of peat and pine. It is a direct connection to the past, a physical experience that hasn't changed in 1,000 years. While their language and their gods might be different from yours, their relationship with the fire was identical. They knew the fear of the cold and the profound relief of the hearth. You can almost feel the presence of the generations of night watchers who sat exactly where you are sitting, their eyes reflecting the embers as they waited for the sun to return. If you think your modern heating bill is a headache, imagine the logistical challenge of fueling a landgilder for 5 months of winter. It required a massive effort of gathering, cutting, drying, and hauling. Every log represented hours of labor in the sun of the previous summer. The fire was a spent currency, a treasure that was literally burned to keep the darkness at bay. This is why the fire was treated with such reverence. To waste a fire was to waste the very effort of survival. You look at the glowing coals and see the sweat of the summer captured in the heat of the winter. It is a beautiful, circular economy of energy. The smoke layer above you has thickened slightly, creating a dark, velvety ceiling that seems to press down with a comforting weight. It traps the warmth in the lower half of the room, acting like a thermal blanket. You notice that the high rafters are coated in a thick, glossy layer of soot, which historians call fire glaze. This layer actually helps protect the wood from rot and dampness, sealing the timber against the humid breath of the many people and animals living within. The fire doesn't just warm the inhabitants. It maintains the very structure of the house. It is a symbiotic relationship where the fire consumes the wood to save the house. You feel a gentle drowsiness creeping over you, the kind that only comes from being perfectly warm in a cold place. The contrast is the key. You can hear the wind occasionally buffeting the thick turf roof, a distant, frustrated sound, but it cannot reach you. The fire is a barrier that no storm can cross. You watch as a small piece of glowing coal falls from the main pile, rolling a few inches away before slowly fading from bright orange to a dull, dusty red. It is a reminder that everything has its cycle, but for now, the cycle is one of abundance and comfort. The Langhelder is long enough that different areas of the fire are used for different things. At one end, where the flames are highest, the heavy cooking is done. In the middle, where the embers are most stable, the bread might be baked on flat stones or small iron griddles. At the far end, the fire is kept lower, providing a gentle heat for those who want to talk or work on small crafts like carving bone or weaving nets. It is a versatile tool, a multi-zone climate control system that responds to the needs of the family. You are currently in the rest zone, where the heat is just right for letting your muscles relax and your mind wander. You think about the Viking tan, a light, hearted term for the way people's skin would become slightly bronzed and weathered from sitting so close to the radiant heat of the hearth all winter. It was a sign of a well-kept home, a mark of someone who had spent their time in the heart of the village. There is something deeply satisfying about the way the heat sinks into your skin, reaching past the surface and warming you from the inside out. It is a luxury that requires no technology, only the ancient understanding of how to build a fire and how to keep it. As you prepare to move deeper into the Longhouse, to explore the other secrets of its warmth, you take one last long look at the Langhelder. It is a masterpiece of simplicity. In a world that often feels too fast and too bright, the slow, steady rhythm of the fire is a gift. It doesn't demand your attention. It simply offers its presence. You stand up, your body feeling heavy and limber, and move away from the direct heat. The air remains warm, thanks to the thick walls and the radiant stones, but the golden light of the hearth follows you, casting a long, flickering shadow that guides you toward the back of the hall. The fire will still be here when you return, a silent, glowing guardian that never sleeps, ensuring that the Viking village remains a place where the ice is always an outsider. The shadows dance on the woven tapestries that line the walls, and for a moment, the figures of heroes and monsters seem to move in the firelight. It is easy to see why this was the place of storytelling. The hearth creates the stage, and the smoke provides the atmosphere. You take a slow, deep breath of the seasoned air, feeling the weight of the history around you. The Longhouse isn't just a building, it's a living organism, and the hearth is its soul. With every crackle of the wood, the soul of the house speaks, telling a story of survival, of community, and of the enduring power of a simple fire against the infinite cold of the north. You move into the shadows, the warmth of the embers still glowing on your back like a parting blessing. As you move deeper into the Longhouse, away from the flickering orange dominance of the hearth, you notice a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The air, which was previously filled with the sharp, dry scent of burning wood and peat, now becomes heavier, sweeter, and more humid. You are walking toward the back of the house, a region where the shadows are deeper, and the floor begins to slope gently downward. The ground beneath your feet transitions from the hard, packed, swept clay of the living area to a more textured surface of trodden earth and layers of golden straw. You are entering the byre, the integrated stable that forms the other half of this massive structure. This is the biological engine of the Viking village, a place where the line between the human world and the animal world fades into a shared, breathing warmth. It is here that the secret to surviving the sub-zero temperatures of a Scandinavian winter truly comes alive, not through fire, but through the quiet, relentless heat of living bodies. The sound of the house changes here as well. The crackle of the fire is now a distant background hum, replaced by a rhythmic, comforting soundtrack of survival. You hear the slow, methodical grinding of teeth as a cow chews her cud, the soft, rhythmic rustle of hay being shifted by a heavy hoof, and the deep, resonant sigh of a horse settling into its stall. There is a profound sense of peace in this shared space. In your modern world, animals are often relegated to distant fields or sterile barns, but for the Norse, the proximity of their livestock was a matter of life and death. The animals were not just a source of food or labor. They were living space heaters. If you think your utility bill is high, consider the efficiency of a system where your furnace also provides you with milk, wool, and leather. It is a masterpiece of prehistoric multitasking, a way of ensuring that every calorie of energy consumed by the farm is turned into heat for the household. You run your hand along one of the sturdy wooden partitions that divide the byre into individual stalls. The wood here is stained dark with the oils of animal coats and the humidity of their breath. Each stall is narrow, designed to keep the animals close together to maximize the concentration of warmth. Mainstream historical facts tell us that most Viking-age longhouses in the North Atlantic were specifically designed as byre dwellings, with the animals and humans separated by only a thin wooden screen or a small elevation in the floor. This proximity allowed the radiant heat from the livestock to drift upward and forward into the human living quarters. A single healthy cow can produce between 200 and 400 watts of heat just by existing, which means a modest herd of 10 or 12 animals is effectively a 4,000-watt heater running 24 hours a day. It is a steady, reliable source of warmth that doesn't require a single log of wood to maintain, provided you have enough hay to keep the biological fire burning inside the animals. The smell is the first thing your modern senses might protest. But as you stand here in the dim light, you realize it is not the scent of filth. It is the smell of life. There is the earthy, sweet aroma of dried meadow grass, the sharp tang of animal musk, and the warm, damp scent of clover, scented breath. It is a complex, organic perfume that speaks of a functioning ecosystem. You notice that the floor of the byre is cleverly engineered with a central drainage gully, often lined with flat stones, that slopes toward the far end of the house. This ensured that the living space remained relatively clean and dry, while the precious manure was collected for the spring fields. Historians still argue whether the partition between the human and animal sections was a solid floor-to-ceiling wall or a lower, porous screen designed specifically to maximize the flow of warm air between the two halves of the building. Looking at the way the smoke and the animal steam mingle in the rafters, it seems likely that the house was treated as one large, interconnected thermal zone. You find yourself leaning against one of the massive interior posts, watching a small calf as it blinks its large, dark eyes at you. The cows of this era were not the giant, overbred beasts you see in modern industrial farms. A quirky tidbit of Norse history is that Viking cattle were significantly smaller than today's breeds, often standing only about a meter high at the shoulder, roughly the size of a large pony. Their small stature made them easier to house and required less fodder to keep them alive during the lean months of winter. They were hardy, fuzzy creatures with thick coats that trapped their own body heat, much like the wool of the sheep huddled in the corner. You watch the steam rising from their backs, a faint, ghostly mist that curls around the timber beams. This steam adds humidity to the air, which helps to keep the longhouse from becoming too dry and dusty from the central fire. It is a perfectly balanced environment where the humans provide the shelter and the animals provide the warmth. The shared living arrangement also provided a layer of security that is hard to imagine today. In the dark of a winter night, with the wind howling against the turf walls, the sound of the animals was a constant reassurance. If a predator approached, or if an animal was in distress, the family would know immediately, separated only by a few feet of timber. You can imagine the comfort of lying in your bed, closet near the hearth, hearing the steady, slow breathing of your wealth just a few yards away. It was a physical manifestation of prosperity and safety. If you think your home security system is sophisticated, try sleeping next to a horse that can hear a footfall on the snow from 100 yards away. The animals were the silent guardians of the Longhouse, their presence a living shield against the loneliness of the Arctic night. As you stand in the byre, you realize that the heat isn't just coming from the animals themselves, but also from the bedding beneath them. The thick layers of straw and heather act as a natural fermentation bed. As the waste mixes with the bedding, it begins to slowly break down, a process that generates its own internal heat. This deep litter method of stabling was a common practice, providing a warm, cushioned floor for the animals while creating a slow release heating pad for the entire end of the building. You walk a few steps further, feeling the floor grow slightly warmer beneath your boots. It is a gritty, grounded warmth, the kind of heat that feels like it belongs to the earth itself. Every element of this arrangement was a calculated move to capture and hold every stray joule of energy in a world where warmth was the most precious commodity. The placement of the animals at the windward end of the house was another clever trick of Norse architecture. By putting the byre on the side of the house, that faced the prevailing winter winds. The animals acted as a living buffer. Their body mass and the hay stored in the lofts above them created a massive layer of insulation that protected the human living quarters from the coldest gusts. You look up and see the low lofts packed with the summer's harvest of dried grass and leaves. This wasn't just food, it was a thick, golden blanket that kept the heat of the fire from escaping through the roof and blocked the chill of the snow from seeping in. If you think your attic insulation is efficient, try sleeping under 6 feet of tightly packed, sun-dried hay that smells like a July afternoon. In the middle of the night, the Longhouse becomes a symphony of biological sounds. You find a spot to sit on a low stone ledge, closing your eyes to better hear the life around you. There is the soft clop of a hoof on a drainage stone, the rustle of a sheep's wool against the wooden slats, and the occasional low, guttural grunt of a pig dreaming in the straw. It is a deeply grounding experience, a reminder that you are part of a cycle that is much larger than yourself. The boundaries of the individual are blurred in the Longhouse. You are part of the herd, and the herd is part of you. The warmth you feel is a communal gift, a shared resource that is maintained by every breathing soul under this turf roof. You think about the light-hearted idea that the Vikings were the first to invent floor heating, though their version involved significantly more moving than a modern electric system. There is a sense of humor in the reality of it. The fierce, legendary raiders of the North spending their winter nights in what was essentially a very cozy, very high-end barn. But there is nothing primitive about the intelligence of this design. It is a sophisticated response to an extreme environment. The byre was the heart of the farm's economy, and by bringing it inside, the Norse ensured that their most valuable assets would survive the winter in peak condition. A warm cow is a productive cow, and a productive cow meant survival for the family when the spring finally arrived. As the night stretches on, the humidity from the byre begins to settle on the cooler parts of the walls, creating a fine, glistening frost on the stone foundations. But here, near the stalls, the air remains thick and temperate. You watch the way the light from your small oil lamp catches the texture of the animals' coats. The sheep are like clouds of dirty snow, their wool dense and oily with lanolin. This lanolin is a natural water repellent, and it also helps to trap heat close to the skin. You reach out and sink your fingers into the thick fleece of a nearby iwi. It is surprisingly warm, almost hot to the touch, a concentrated pocket of life force. You realize that the wool you wear on your back is just a continuation of the warmth these animals provide. The Longhouse is a place where every material is repurposed and every life is valued for its contribution to the collective survival. The social hierarchy of the village was often reflected in the byre as well. The size and quality of the stable area were direct indicators of a chieftain's wealth. You imagine a great hall where the byre stretched for 40 meters, housing dozens of head of cattle and teams of powerful oxen. The heat from such a massive herd would have been intense, creating a microclimate that could withstand even the most brutal Arctic storms. In these larger houses, the byre was a place of constant activity, with servants and farmhands moving through the shadows to feed and water the stock. But here, in this smaller village home, the atmosphere is more intimate. It is a family affair, a quiet partnership between the humans and their beasts. You find yourself feeling a strange sense of envy for this simplicity. In your world, warmth is something you pay for, a distant utility delivered through pipes and wires. Here, warmth is something you live with. It has a face, a voice, and a heartbeat. It is a relationship of mutual care. You feed the cows, and the cows keep you from freezing. You build the walls, and the sheep provide the insulation. It is a beautiful, closed loop of existence that makes the cold of the outside world seem irrelevant. The Longhouse is not just a building, it is a living, breathing entity, a giant organism made of wood, turf, humans, and animals, all huddled together in a defiant stand against the frost. As you prepare to leave the byre and move back toward the human side of the house, you take a moment to appreciate the silence. The animals have mostly settled now, their breathing synchronized into a slow, heavy tide. The air is still, and the warmth is absolute. You feel a deep sense of security, the kind that only comes from knowing that all the necessities of life are within arm's reach. The hay, the water, the food, and the warmth are all here, tucked safely behind 2 meters of solid earth. You walk back toward the center of the hall, the smell of the byre clinging to your clothes like a warm memory. It is a scent that you will carry with you, a reminder of the biological central heating that made the Viking Age possible. The transition back to the main hall is marked by the return of the hearth's glow. The orange light spills across the floor, meeting the shadows of the byre in a soft, blurred line. You look back one last time, seeing the dark shapes of the cattle as they rest in their stone-lined stalls. They are the silent partners in this ancient struggle, the quiet providers of the heat that keeps the village alive. Without them, the Longhouse would be a cold, empty shell. With them, it is a sanctuary of life in a world of ice. You feel a profound respect for the wisdom of the ancestors who understood that, to survive the winter, you must bring the life of the fields inside with you. You think about how this integration of living spaces influenced the very language and culture of the Norse. The word for fee, or money, in Old Norse fa, is the same word used for cattle. Wealth was not an abstract number in a bank account. It was a physical, breathing thing that you could touch and feel the warmth of. Your prosperity was measured by how many hearts were beating in your byre on a winter's night. It is a tangible, visceral way of looking at the world, one that places value on the living and the present. As you move closer to the fire, the radiant heat of the logs mixes with the lingering warmth of the animals, creating a perfect, balanced temperature that lulls you into a state of deep relaxation. The timber posts that separate the living area from the byre are often carved with protective runes or symbols of fertility, a nod to the spiritual importance of the livestock. You trace the lines of a carved serpent with your thumb, feeling the smooth, worn wood. These symbols were meant to ensure the health of the herd, but they also served as a reminder of the thin line between survival and disaster. In this world, there is no room for waste or neglect. Everything must be cared for, from the smallest lamb to the oldest timber. This sense of responsibility is part of the fabric of the Longhouse, a weight that is shared by everyone who lives within its walls. You find a seat near the partition, where the 2 worlds meet. The air here is the perfect middle ground, not too smoky, not too humid, just a steady, gentle warmth that seems to seep into your very marrow. You watch the dust motes dancing in the dim light, caught in the updraft created by the combined heat of the fire and the animals. It is a slow, hypnotic dance, a visual representation of the energy moving through the house. You feel your breathing slow down, matching the rhythm of the byre. The Longhouse has a way of slowing time, of stripping away the unnecessary and leaving only the essential. Historians still debate the exact health implications of this close quarters living, but for the Vikings, the trade-off was clear. A bit of cough or a lingering scent was a small price to pay for the gift of warmth. In a world where the temperature could drop to 40 below zero, the byre was not a luxury. It was a biological necessity. It was the difference between a village that froze and a village that flourished. You lean your head against the wooden post, feeling the vibration of a distant horse's stomp through the timber. It is a reassuring sound, a heartbeat in the dark. The Longhouse is now a complete picture in your mind. The thick turf walls, the glowing hearth, and the breathing byre. It is a fortress of warmth, a clever and resilient solution to the challenges of the North. You realize that why Viking villages never froze isn't a mystery of lost technology, but a story of profound connection to the natural world. They didn't fight the cold. They built a world that outsmarted it. They used the earth, the fire, and the animals as their tools, creating a space where life could not just survive, but thrive. You take a deep, slow breath, feeling the warmth of the hall wrap around you like a heavy wool cloak. The night is still young, and there are more secrets to discover in the soft, smoky light of the Longhouse. You move away from the heavy, humid warmth of the animals and return to the main hall, where the firelight is softer and the air feels a bit more refined. As you walk, you notice that the warmth you feel isn't just coming from the fire or the walls. It is something you are carrying with you. You look down at your sleeves and feel the weight of the heavy, scratchy fabric against your skin. This is the fourth secret of the Viking village, the incredible power of their textiles. In a world without synthetic heat, trapping fleece or lightweight down jackets, the Norse people mastered the art of biological engineering through the hair of their animals. You run your fingers along the cuff of your tunic, feeling the oily, dense texture of the wool. It is a material that feels alive, a protective layer that has been crafted with thousands of hours of patient, rhythmic labor. If you think your favorite winter sweater is cozy, try wearing a hand-spun, lanolin-rich Viking cloak that could probably stand up on its own if you left it in the corner. You realize that the people in this Longhouse aren't just wearing clothes. They are wearing a sophisticated armor against the elements. The wool of the northern sheep is a marvel of nature. You learn that it consists of two distinct layers, the thel, a soft, downy inner fiber that traps air and provides incredible insulation, and the tog, a long, coarse, and water-repellent outer hair. When these two are spun together, they create a yarn that is virtually indestructible. A mainstream historical fact that might surprise you is that wool can actually absorb up to 30% of its own weight in moisture without feeling wet to the touch. This meant that even if a Viking was caught in a sleet storm or splashed by the icy spray of the North Sea, their clothing would continue to generate heat through a chemical reaction that occurs when wool fibers get damp. You sit down on a wooden chest, near a large vertical frame leaning against the wall. This is the warp, weighted loom, the technological heart of the textile world. It looks like a giant wooden harp, with long threads hanging down, held taut by heavy stones at the bottom. You hear the soft, rhythmic clacking of the loom, weights as they sway slightly in the draft. It is a peaceful, hypnotic sound that has echoed through these halls for centuries. You imagine the women of the house standing here for hours, their hands moving with the speed and precision of a modern machine. They pass a wooden shuttle back and forth, weaving the threads into a dense, tight fabric. This wasn't just a hobby, it was the backbone of the economy. A single sail for a Viking ship could take years to weave, and the same care was put into the blankets and tunics that kept the family from freezing. Historians still argue whether the intricate geometric patterns often found in Viking textiles were purely for status and decoration, or if the extra thread count and the way the yarns overlapped served to create pockets of air that significantly increased the garment's thermal efficiency. Looking at the thickness of the weave, it seems likely that every design choice had a practical purpose. You run your hand over a finished piece of cloth draped over the loom. It feels remarkably heavy, like a weighted blanket designed by someone who really hated being cold. There is a joke in the village that a well-made wool tunic is the only thing tougher than a Viking warrior, and looking at the tight, resilient weave, you can see why. Your modern laundry machine would likely have a total meltdown if you tried to wash this fabric, but here, it is a treasure that will last for generations. The process of creating this warmth begins long before the loom. You think back to the spring, when the sheep were not shorn with shears, but, rude, by hand, the wool was gently pulled away as it naturally loosened. This kept the long fibers intact. You imagine the piles of raw, greasy wool being brought into the Longhouse. A quirky and slightly unappealing tidbit is that the Norse often used stale urine as a cleaning agent and a mordant for dyes. The ammonia in the liquid was the only way to cut through the thick lanolin and prep the fibers for the vibrant colors they loved. While the thought might make you grateful for modern detergent, the results were undeniable. The colors they achieved using roots and bark, rich reds from madder, deep blues from woad, and bright yellows from weld, turned the dark interior of the Longhouse into a gallery of vibrant, warm hues. You pick up a small, wooden tool lying on the bench. It is a drop spindle, a simple stick with a heavy stone or clay whorl at the bottom. You give it a flick, and it spins like a top, pulling a strand of wool into a tight, strong thread. Spinning was a constant activity. You would see people spinning while they walked, while they talked, and even while they sat by the fire. It was the background noise of life, the constant whir of the spindle and the soft thud as it occasionally hit the floor are the sounds of warmth being manufactured. Each thread is a tiny barrier against the frost, and when thousands of them are woven together, they become an impenetrable wall. You feel a deep respect for the patience required to turn a pile of sheep hair into a cloak that can save a life. Layering was the true secret to the Viking wardrobe. You feel the linen under tunic against your skin, which is cool and breathable, helping to wick away moisture from your body. Over this goes the heavy wool tunic, and over that, perhaps a sleeveless jerkin of leather or fur. But the crown jewel of winter survival is the cloak. You look at a massive, rectangular piece of wool pinned at the shoulder with a heavy silver brooch. This cloak is thick enough to double as a sleeping bag. In fact, it often did. The Norse didn't use separate bedsheets. They simply wrapped themselves in their cloaks and blankets, letting their body heat build up within the wool. If you think your winter coat is heavy, try walking 5 miles in a rain-soaked wool cloak that weighs 20 pounds. It was a workout and a heating system all in one. One of the most fascinating techniques you observe is NCL binding, an ancient form of needle binding that predates knitting and crochet. You see an elderly woman sitting by the fire, using a single bone needle to loop a thick yarn into a pair of mittens. Unlike knitting, which can unravel if a single thread is cut, NCL binding creates a fabric that is incredibly dense and durable. If you poke a hole in a needle-bound sock, the rest of the fabric stays perfectly intact. These socks were then felted, shrunk and thickened through heat and friction to create a footwear liner that was essentially a soft, woolly boot. You imagine stepping out into the snow with these on, your feet encased in a pocket of warm, dry air. It is a level of comfort that makes modern wool socks look like tissue paper. The sound of the weaving room is a gentle, domestic rhythm. You hear the clack-clack of the loom, the soft hiss of the wool being drawn through the fingers, and the occasional thrum of a heavy fabric being shaken out. It is a productive silence. You notice that the floor around the loom is covered in tiny scraps of fiber, creating a soft, fuzzy carpet that adds another microscopic layer of insulation to the house. In the Viking world, nothing was wasted. The shortest fibers, too coarse for clothing, were stuffed into the gaps between the wall planks or used to line the beds of the dogs. The Longhouse is a giant filter, trapping every bit of warmth and every scrap of material. You find yourself wondering about the weather. Cloaks that were sometimes traded as high-value currency. These were cloaks so well made and so heavily felted that they were essentially waterproof. They were treated with extra sheep's oil or even beeswax to ensure that the water would bead off them like a duck's back. You can almost feel the weight of such a garment on your shoulders, a heavy, protective shell that makes you feel invincible against the wind. In the long dark of the winter, having a good cloak was the difference between being a prisoner of the house and being a master of the landscape. It was your portable longhouse, a small piece of the village that you carried with you wherever you went. As the evening settles, the women put away their spindles and needles, but the presence of the textiles remains. You look at the tapestries hanging on the walls. They aren't just there to tell the stories of Odin or Thor. They serve a very practical purpose. They act as a soft wall, creating a pocket of still air between the cold turf and the warm interior. Every time the door opens and a gust of wind tries to enter, the heavy hangings barely move, absorbing the shock and keeping the temperature stable. You realize that the longhouse is essentially a giant, multi-layered garment. The turf is the outer cloak, the timber is the sturdy frame, and the textiles are the soft, warm lining. You lean back against a pile of folded blankets, feeling the incredible softness of the thell fibers. It is a luxury that you don't often associate with the Viking Age, but here, in the heart of the winter, it is the most important thing in the world. You think about the humor in the fact that these legendary raiders, known for their sharp swords and fierce spirits, spent so much of their time worrying about the quality of their knitting. But then again, if you were about to sail across the Atlantic in an open boat, you would probably care a lot about your socks, too. There is a practical, grounded wisdom in this focus on textiles. They understood that the smallest thread was a link in the chain of survival. The smell of the wool is everywhere, a clean, earthy scent that reminds you of the hills and the rain. It is a comforting smell, one that signals safety and rest. You find your fingers idly playing with the fringe of a blanket, feeling the individual twists of the yarn. Each one was made by a person. Each one carries the energy of the hands that spun it. It makes the warmth feel more personal, more human. In a modern house, heat is anonymous. Here, warmth is something your mother wove, or your sister spun, or your grandfather felted. It is a gift from the community to itself. You notice a small basket of felted wool balls near the hearth. These were used as insulation for the hands, or sometimes heated by the fire, and placed in the bottom of a bed to keep the feet warm. It is the Viking version of a hot water bottle, and it works surprisingly well. You pick one up and feel the trapped heat within the dense fibers. It stays warm for a remarkably long time. This is the secret of wool. It is a master of storage. It doesn't just block the cold, it holds onto the heat. You realize that the entire village is a collection of these heat storage systems, from the stones in the hearth to the wool on your back. Historians often point out that the Vikings were among the best dressed people in Europe at the time. Their love of bright colors and intricate patterns wasn't just vanity. It was a celebration of their ability to master their environment. To wear a beautifully dyed, perfectly woven tunic in the middle of a frozen wasteland was a way of saying that the winter had not defeated you. It was an act of defiance. You look around the room and see the flashes of red and blue in the firelight, and you feel the spirit of that defiance. The cold might be infinite, but the creativity of the human spirit is just as vast. You think about the Viking wash day, which was a rare and monumental event. Because the wool was so oily and heavy, it wasn't washed often. Instead, it was hung outside in the freezing wind to air out, or beaten with sticks to remove the dust. This might sound a bit questionable to your modern sensibilities, but the high lanolin content actually made the wool naturally antibacterial. It resisted odors and dirt in a way that modern fabrics can't match. You realize that you probably smell like a campfire and a wet sheep, but you also realize that you don't care. You are warm, and that is the only metric that matters in the 11th century. The rhythm of the house begins to slow down as the last of the textile work is put aside. The loom stands silent, its long shadows stretching across the floor. Like the ghosts of the day's labor, you feel the weight of the wool blankets being pulled over the sleeping platforms, the soft fro of the fabric settling into place. Each person is cocooning themselves in their own private fortress of fiber. You find your own spot, wrapping a heavy cloak around your shoulders. The wool is scratchy at first, but within minutes, you feel your own body heat reflecting back at you, creating a microclimate of perfect comfort. You think about the loom songs that were sung to keep the rhythm of the weaving. They were long, narrative poems that could last for hours. helping the weavers stay focused during the short winter days. The songs were as much a part of the textile as the wool itself. You can almost hear the faint echo of those voices in the silence of the hall. The Longhouse is a vessel for stories, and many of those stories are woven directly into the fabric of the clothes you are wearing. You are literally wrapped in the history and the culture of the village. The wind outside gives a particularly loud howl, rattling the smoke hole cover, but you don't even flinch. You are tucked inside layers of linen, wool, and fur, protected by a technology that has been perfected over thousands of years. The cold is a distant idea, a theoretical problem for someone else to deal with. Here, inside the wool, there is only peace. You feel your muscles finally letting go of the day's tension, sinking into the soft, springy depth of the blankets. The textiles have done their job. They have captured the heat of the fire and the heat of your body, holding them in a gentle, persistent embrace. As you drift towards sleep, you realize that why Viking villages never froze is a question with many layers. It's the turf, the fire, the animals, and finally, the wool. It is a comprehensive system of survival that covers every inch of life. You take one last look at the loom in the shadows, its upright posts standing like silent sentinels. Tomorrow, the clack-clack will begin again, and the village will continue to weave its way through the winter. But for now, the work is done. The warmth is secure. You close your eyes, feeling the incredible, heavy, itchy, wonderful protection of the Viking world wrapping you in a dreamless, frozen, proof sleep. The last thing you feel is the soft tickle of a wool fiber against your cheek, a tiny reminder of the millions of threads that stand between you and the Arctic. You breathe in the scent of the hearth and the sheep, a scent that now feels like home. The Longhouse is quiet, the fire is low, and the wool is warm. Everything is as it should be. The secrets of the Longhouse are safe with you, tucked away in the layers of history and the folds of a heavy winter cloak. You have found the heart of the village, and it is made of the simplest, strongest things. You find yourself moving away from the rhythmic clacking of the loom and toward the long, raised wooden platforms that line the walls of the great hall. These are the setstocker, the physical and social foundations of life in the Longhouse. In your modern world, you might value a bedroom with a door that locks and a 5-foot radius of personal space, but here, the concept of alone time is as foreign as a tropical beach. To the Norse, being alone in the winter was not a luxury, it was a danger. The fifth secret of why these villages never froze is found in the sheer density of human life packed into these timber-framed halls. You are looking at a living, breathing social radiator. When 40 or 50 people gather in a single room, their collective body heat becomes a powerful force of nature. If you think your local coffee shop feels warm on a rainy day, imagine that feeling multiplied by a factor of 10 and wrapped in 2 meters of solid turf. You climb onto one of the platforms, which sits about half a meter above the floor. The wood is cool but smooth, polished by the sliding of bodies and the friction of wool over decades. These platforms are the multi-purpose furniture of the Viking Age. During the day, they are benches for eating and working, but at night, they transform into a massive, communal bed. You notice how the people are beginning to settle, not in separate rooms, but in clusters of families and friends. There is a mainstream historical fact that often surprises modern observers. In a Viking longhouse, the social hierarchy was literally built into the seating. The closer you were to the center of the hall and the high seat of the chieftain, the more status you held, and, conveniently, the more heat you received from the central hearth. To be relegated to the far ends of the platform, near the drafting doors, was a sign of low standing, a physical reminder that in this culture, social warmth and physical warmth were one and the same. Historians still argue whether the massive timber posts that divide these platforms were purely structural, or if they served as privacy markers that defined a family's personal territory within the shared space. From where you are sitting, it feels like the latter doesn't really matter. The air is thick with the presence of others, a soft, communal hum of breathing and shifting. You realize that personal space is a modern invention that would have seemed hilariously impractical to a Viking. In this hall, the best way to stay warm is to be part of the pile. You see children huddling between their parents and elderly aunts tucked between the younger, more heat-productive members of the clan. It is a human puffer jacket, a layer of communal warmth that makes the sub-zero temperatures outside feel like a distant rumor. You could call it the original co-living space, though your modern roommates might have a few complaints about the lack of Wi-Fi and the occasional snoring that sounds like a dragon with a head cold. In the corner, you notice something that looks like a large wooden cabinet built directly into the wall. This is a low-stimulation, or a shut bed. This was the ultimate luxury in a longhouse, a tiny enclosed room within the room. You watch as a wealthy farmer and his wife climb inside and pull the heavy wooden doors shut behind them. Inside that small, timber-lined box, their body heat is trapped in a space no larger than a modern closet. It is the Viking equivalent of a high-end insulation system. A quirky and slightly strange tidbit is that these shut beds were often equipped with strong internal bolts, not just for warmth, but for security. In the rare event that the longhouse was attacked in the middle of the night, the shut bed acted as a miniature fortress, giving the inhabitants a few precious seconds to wake up and grab their axes. It is a stark reminder that even in the coziest environments, the Norse never truly let their guard down. As the night deepens, the social heat of the hall transitions from physical to psychological. A man with a weathered face and a silver ring on his arm stands near the hearth. He is a skald, a poet and storyteller, and as he begins to speak, the entire room falls into a deep, respectful silence. His voice is low and resonant, carrying a rhythm that seems to match the flickering of the fire. He isn't just telling a story, he is casting a spell of community. He speaks of gods who froze giants with a glance and heroes who crossed the burning bridge of the rainbow. In a world without books or screens, these stories are the glue that holds the village together. You feel the collective focus of the room shift toward the skald, and suddenly, the cold outside feels even more irrelevant. The shared imagination of the group creates a warmth that no turf wall can provide. You lean back against a pile of furs, feeling the gentle vibration of the hall. The sound of 40 people breathing in unison is a hypnotic, steady tide. It is the sound of a successful tribe. If you think your modern apartment is quiet, try listening to the silence of a longhouse. It isn't a dead silence, it is a rich, textured quiet filled with the soft rustle of straw, the occasional pop of a dying ember, and the muffled thump of a dog dreaming at the foot of a platform. You realize that the Norse didn't just survive the winter. They turned it into a season of intense social bonding. Without the distractions of farming or seafaring, the winter was the only time the community could truly be together. The Longhouse was a pressure cooker of culture, where legends were polished and alliances were forged in the shared heat of the hearth. One of the more humorous aspects of this crowded life is the snoring symphony. You hear a deep, gravelly rumble from the far end of the hall, followed by a sharp, whistling breath from someone closer to you. In the close quarters of the Longhouse, you become intimately familiar with the nocturnal habits of your neighbors. You imagine the light-hearted banter that must have occurred over the morning porridge, about who kept the chieftain awake with their imitation of a rutting elk. There is a sense of humor in the survival, a light-heartedness that prevents the crowded conditions from becoming stifling. You are all in this together, and if the price of staying warm is listening to your uncle's thunderous snoozing, it is a price you are more than willing to pay. The beds themselves are marvels of texture and temperature management. You run your hand over the surface of a sleeping area. Beneath the top layer of wool blankets, there is a thick mattress of dried heather and ferns. These plants aren't just for padding. They are naturally springy and provide excellent airflow, preventing the bedding from becoming damp from the humidity of so many bodies. Above the heather, there are layers of reindeer hide. Reindeer hair is hollow, which makes it one of the most efficient natural insulators in the world. You sink your hand into the fur, and it feels like the heat of your own palm is being reflected back at you instantly. It is a primitive form of memory foam, if memory foam was made of Arctic deer and smelled faintly of wood smoke. You notice how the movement of people within the hall is governed by a set of unwritten rules. There is a fluid, graceful way that everyone navigates the crowded space, stepping over sleeping dogs and around working looms without a word being spoken. It is a dance of necessity. The shared bed of the Longhouse requires a level of trust and cooperation that is hard to fathom in a world of individual bedrooms and do not disturb signs. You feel a sense of belonging that is rare in the modern age. You aren't just an individual in a house. You are a cell in a larger organism. This sense of connection is perhaps the most powerful heat source of all. It is the warmth of knowing that if you were to shiver, someone would notice and pull a blanket over you. A mainstream historical fact that adds to the coziness is the bed stone. You see a young girl heating a smooth, flat stone by the edge of the hearth. Once it is warm to the touch, she wraps it in a scrap of old wool and carries it back to her spot on the platform, tucking it under the furs at the foot of her bed. It is the Viking version of a hot water bottle, a simple and effective way to pre-heat your corner of the communal mattress. You imagine the feeling of sliding your cold toes toward that warm stone in the middle of a dark January night. It is a small, domestic ritual that speaks of the deep care the Norse took to ensure their comfort. Historians still debate the exact hygiene practices of the Longhouse, but many believe that the Saturday bath was a sacred tradition. Even in the middle of winter, the Norse would heat massive vats of water or visit local hot springs to scrub away the soot and oil of the week. This wasn't just about cleanliness. It was a social event. You can imagine the group returning to the Longhouse, their skin glowing and their hair damp, bringing a fresh, clean scent to the smoky air. It was a way of resetting the social clock, a reminder that even in the depths of a crowded winter, order and dignity were maintained. It is a far cry from the image of the dirty Viking, often portrayed in movies. In reality, they were likely the cleanest people in Europe, a fact that probably made huddling together for warmth much more pleasant for everyone involved. The shadows of the skald and the listener's dance across the ceiling, elongated by the low angle of the hearth fire. The stories he tells are the oral history of the people, a way of keeping the ancestors warm. In the memories of the living, you realize that the Longhouse is a library as much as it is a home. Every timber, every carving, and every person is a repository of information. In the winter, this information is shared and reinforced, ensuring that the identity of the village remains strong even when the world outside is hidden by snow. You feel the weight of this history in the air, a heavy, comforting presence that anchors you to the spot. You think about the Viking social distance, which was essentially -2 inches. If you were to try to keep to yourself in this environment, you would not only be cold, but you would be viewed with suspicion. To be a part of the Longhouse was to be part of the collective. There is a quirky tidbit about how the Norse would sometimes use kennings, metaphorical riddles, to describe their living conditions. A house might be called a wooden sky, and the fire, the sun of the hall. This poetic way of looking at their surroundings transformed a crowded, smoky room into a mythological landscape. It made the reality of being packed like sardines into a turf box feel grand and significant. As the skald finishes his tale, a low murmur of approval ripples through the hall. It is a soft, warm sound, like the purring of a giant cat. People begin to settle into their final sleeping positions, the movement of the crowd slowing as the weight of the night takes over. You find a spot on the edge of the platform, pulling a heavy bearskin over your legs. The fur is thick and incredibly warm, a trophy of the hunt that now serves as a guardian of your sleep. You feel the radiant heat from the person next to you, a gentle, steady warmth that reminds you that you are not alone. The Longhouse has a way of dissolving the ego, leaving only the fundamental human need for connection and comfort. You look toward the center of the hall, where the high seat stands empty for the night. Even in the dark, you can see the intricate carvings of Odin's ravens on the backrest. These seats were the spiritual anchors of the house, representing the authority of the law and the continuity of the family line. The fact that the entire village slept around these seats reinforced the idea that the leader's job was to protect the collective. It is a powerful image of unity. If you think your leadership style is modern, try sleeping in the same room as everyone you manage for 5 months straight. It requires a level of transparency and empathy that would break most modern CEOs. The wind gives a distant, lonely whistle against the smoke hole, but inside the hall, the atmosphere is one of absolute security. The collective heat of 40 bodies, combined with the thermal mass of the turf and the radiant energy of the hearth, has created a microclimate that is entirely independent of the weather. You feel a deep, primal satisfaction in this victory over the elements. The Longhouse secret isn't a complex machine, it is a complex social contract. By choosing to live together, the Norse turned their greatest vulnerability, the cold, into their greatest strength, community. You find your eyelids growing heavy, the rhythm of the breathing around you acting as a natural lullaby. The air is perfectly temperate now, balanced between the heat of the fire and the cool breath of the earth walls. You realize that you have never felt more safe or more held than you do in this crowded, smoky, ancient room. The Longhouse is a womb of history, a place where the human spirit is nurtured through the darkest times. You take one last look at the glowing embers of the hearth, which now look like a distant city seen from a mountain top. The light is fading, but the warmth is constant. The texture of the reindeer hide against your cheek is soft and grounding. You feel the slow pulse of the village, a heartbeat that has been steady for 1,000 years. Tomorrow there will be chores and repairs and more stories, but for now there is only the shared peace of the hall. You are part of the Norse radiator, now contributing your own small spark of heat to the collective flame. It is a humble and beautiful role to play. You let out a slow, deep breath, feeling the tension drain out of your shoulders and into the straw below. As you drift toward the edge of sleep, you think about the word home. In your world, a home is a place you own. Here, a home is a place where you belong. The difference is subtle but profound. The Viking Longhouse is not just a structure of wood and turf. It is a structure of people. It is a place where the cold cannot enter, because there is no space for it. The warmth of the community fills every crack and corner, leaving no room for the frost. You close your eyes, the last of the skald's words echoing in your mind like a distant song. The winter is long, but the village is strong, and in the heart of the Longhouse, the fire never truly goes out. The silence of the hall is now complete, a deep and velvety quiet that seems to absorb the very idea of noise. You feel yourself sinking deeper into the furs, the warmth of the crowd wrapping you in a dreamless embrace. This is the ultimate comfort of the Viking world. The knowledge that you are surrounded by your people, protected by your walls, and warmed by a fire that was lit long before you were born. You are home. You are safe. You are warm. The secrets of the Longhouse are yours now, a legacy of survival and connection that will carry you through the night and into the first light of a distant, frozen dawn. You find your gaze drifting upward, away from the faces of your sleeping kinsmen, and toward the dark, smoky heights of the rafters. In the dim, flickering light of the dying embers, you see the true wealth of the village hanging just out of reach. This is the sixth secret of the Viking Longhouse, a hidden layer of security that provided the internal fuel necessary to combat the external cold. The ceiling is crowded with bundles of dried herbs, heavy sides of smoked bacon, and long strings of silver, gray fish that shimmer like armor in the gloom. This isn't just a larder, it is a thermal insurance policy. In the Viking Age, warmth was something you had to eat as much as something you had to build. Every calorie hanging from these beams was a spark of energy that would eventually be turned into body heat, keeping the blood moving in your veins, even when the fjord outside was a solid sheet of ice. If you think your modern pantry is well stocked, try looking at a ceiling that holds enough food to feed 50 people for 6 months. You realize that the Longhouse is essentially a giant, inverted grocery store, where the shelvers are the very ribs of the house. The scent here is a heavy, savory cocktail of salt, smoke, and dried fat. It is a smell that signals abundance and safety. You watch the way the rising heat from the hearth continues to gently bathe the hanging meats, keeping them dry and preventing the damp winter air from settling into the fibers. A mainstream historical fact that often goes overlooked is that the Vikings were master chemists of preservation. While people in more southern climates relied heavily on expensive salt, the Norse used the resources of their environment, smoke, wind, and fermentation, to create food that could last for years. Salt was a luxury, often more valuable than silver, so it was used sparingly, reserved for the finest cuts of salmon, or the most important of El's religious feasts. You reach up and touch a hanging bundle of dried Atlantic cod, known as stockfish. It feels as hard as a piece of seasoned timber. To eat it, you would have to beat it with a wooden mallet until the fibers softened, a rhythmic task that provided its own small measure of warmth on a cold morning. But once prepared, this fish is a concentrated hit of protein and minerals. Historians still argue whether the invention of stockfish was the primary catalyst for the Viking expansions, as it provided a lightweight, high-energy food source that never spoiled, allowing long ships to cross vast oceans without the need for frequent restocking. You look at the hundreds of fish hanging above you and see the fuel for empires. It is a quiet, unassuming power, a shelf life that would make a modern prepper weep with joy. You could call it the original protein bar, though the flavor profile is significantly more oceanic than chocolate and peanut butter. The floor beneath your feet holds its own secrets. You notice several heavy, flat stones that look slightly different from the rest of the packed clay. You move toward one and realize it is a lid. Beneath these stones are the storage pits dug deep into the cool, stable earth of the Longhouse floor. In your modern world, you have a refrigerator that hums in the corner, but here, the entire planet is your cold storage unit. You imagine the families lifting these stones to reveal vats of sesor or meat preserved in fermented whey. The acidic environment of the whey acted as a natural preservative, keeping the meat edible for months, while infusing it with a sharp, tangy flavor. A quirky and slightly intense tidbit is that the Vikings also used this method to preserve sheep's heads and flippers, which were considered delicacies. While the thought of fermented sheep's head might not exactly make your mouth water, in the middle of a blizzard, that fat and protein were the difference between a warm night's sleep and a desperate struggle for survival. You find a wooden bowl on a nearby table, containing the remnants of a thick, pale substance called scar. This wasn't the smooth, flavored yogurt you find in a plastic cup today. It was a dense cheese-like product, high in protein and fat. You imagine the feeling of eating a large bowl of this by the fire. The fat provides a slow, burning energy that acts like a thermal blanket from the inside out. There is a light-hearted joke in the village that a man with a belly full of scar and butter is ice-proof. And looking at the nutritional density of their diet, there is a lot of truth to it. The Vikings didn't count calories, they collected them. Every gram of fat was a victory against the frost. You realize that the Viking diet was less about aesthetic goals and more about building a biological furnace that could withstand 40 below zero. The storage of fat was perhaps the most critical task of the autumn. You see large ceramic jars filled with bog butter, butter that has been packed into wooden containers and buried in the peat or stored in the floor pits. The lack of oxygen in these environments kept the butter from going rancid, allowing it to age and develop a deep, earthy flavor. You think about the luxury of spreading a thick layer of that yellow gold onto a piece of hard, flat barley bread. The fat hits your system, sending a wave of warmth through your limbs. It is a physical sensation of comfort, a chemical signal to your brain that the winter is manageable. The Longhouse is a fortress of fat, a place where the oils of the earth and the animals are concentrated to protect the human inhabitants. You notice the baskets of dried berries, lingonberries, crowberries, and cloudberries that were gathered during the brief, intense summer. These are the vitamin pills of the Viking age. They are tart and shriveled, but they carry the essence of the sun. The Vikings knew that to stay warm, your body had to be healthy. If you fell ill with scurvy or malnutrition, the cold would find a way in through your weakened defenses. These berries, often preserved in honey or simply dried in the wind, provided the necessary boost to the immune system. You imagine the taste of a handful of lingonberries, a sudden burst of summer brightness in the middle of a gray winter afternoon. It is a small, sweet reminder that the cycle of the seasons is still turning, even when the sun has disappeared. The grain is another vital component of the house's internal heat. You see the large wooden bens filled with barley, rye, and oats. These were the staples of the Longhouse, turned into thick porridges and dense breads that felt like a brick in your stomach, in the best possible way. The process of grinding the grain on a hand-turned stone quern was a daily chore that generated a surprising amount of physical heat. You can almost hear the low, gritty whir of the stones as the women worked together, their muscles warming as they prepared the day's flour. The bread was often baked directly on the hot stones of the hearth, picking up the flavor of the smoke and the char of the wood. You find yourself craving a piece of that warm, heavy bread, realizing that in this world, food is not just fuel, it is a warm embrace. There is a sense of psychological warmth that comes from seeing the larder full. You imagine the anxiety of a father looking at the snow piling up against the door, and then the profound relief of looking up at the rafters and seeing those hundreds of fish and hams. It is the peace of mind that allows for deep, restful sleep. In your modern life, you might feel a small hum of stress if you run out of milk. But here, the stakes are cosmic. A full house is a warm house, and a warm house is a living house. You feel the weight of this security as you walk through the hall. The food isn't just sitting there, it is active. It is curing, aging, and radiating a promise of survival. Historians still debate the exact chemical properties of the fire glaze on the ceiling food. Some believe that the specific combination of peat smoke and oak smoke created a coating that was not only antibacterial but also served as a mild analgesic, helping the villagers deal with the aches and pains of winter labor. Whether or not it had medicinal properties, the presence of the food above your head creates a literal canopy of comfort. You feel tucked in, shielded from the hunger that roams the world outside. The Longhouse is a self-contained universe where the laws of nature have been negotiated into a truce. We give the smoke a place to rise and the smoke gives us meat that lasts forever. One of the more quirky tidbits of Norse preservation is the use of ash bread. Sometimes, when the grain was low, the Vikings would mix finely ground inner bark or even clean wood ash into their flour to stretch the supply. While it sounds desperate, it was a clever way to add minerals and bulk to the diet. However, in this prosperous village Longhouse, the bins are overflowing with real grain. You see the bags of malted barley waiting to be brewed into all. The brewing process itself was a massive heat producer. For several days, large vats of liquid would be kept simmering over the fire, filling the house with a sweet, grainy steam that smelled like a warm hug. The resulting all was more than just a drink. It was liquid bread, full of B vitamins and enough alcohol to thin the blood and make the extremities feel warm. You think about the joy that would fill the hall on a festival night. The combination of the roaring hearth, the communal songs, and the strong, warm beer created a psychological heat that was impenetrable to the frost. If you think your local pub is cozy on a Friday night, imagine that feeling in a room where the walls are 2 meters of earth and the only light comes from the fire. There is a joke that the Vikings didn't actually conquer England. They just went there looking for a better variety of hops. While probably not historically accurate, it highlights the importance of the liquid warmth in their lives. A mug of warm ale in your hands is a portable hearth, a small sun that you can hold and sip. You move toward the back of the hall, where the larger storage vats are kept. These are the size of modern bathtubs, carved from single trunks of massive trees or built from sturdy oak staves. They are filled with salted meat, pickled vegetables, and the precious whey. You run your hand over the cool, damp wood of a vat. It feels solid and permanent. This is the foundation of the village's resilience. You realize that why Viking villages never froze is as much about the stomach as it is about the walls. If you are hungry, you are cold. No matter how many furs you have or how thick the turf is, the cold will eat you from the inside out if you don't have the fuel to fight back. The Norse understood this better than anyone. They were the masters of the calorie. The visual of the rafters is truly stunning when you take a moment to really look. There are bundles of dried leeks, wild garlic, and onions, their papery skins rustling in the updraft. These provided the flavor and the vital nutrients that kept the blood healthy. You see small pouches of salt, cured eggs, and even dried seaweed, which provided the iodine necessary for thyroid health and metabolic warmth. Every item has its place and its purpose. It is a highly organized system of survival. You feel a sense of awe at the sheer volume of planning required. You couldn't just go to the store in February. Every bite you took in the winter had to be earned and processed in the summer and autumn. It is a relationship with time that is completely foreign to the modern mind. As you stand there, you hear a soft, muffled thump from one of the storage bins as a heavy bag of grain settles. It is a solid, reassuring sound. It reminds you that the house is full. You think about the storage spirits that were often said to inhabit these dark corners. The Norse believed that if you treated your food with respect and kept your larder clean, the spirits would ensure the supply never ran out. It was a way of ritualizing the intense discipline required to manage a winter food supply. You find yourself nodding to the shadows in the corner, a silent gesture of respect for the abundance. The Longhouse is a holy place of preservation, a temple dedicated to the art of not being hungry. You notice a small shelf holding a few jars of honey. This is the ultimate prize, the concentrated energy of 1,000 summer flowers. Honey doesn't just provide sweetness, it provides an immediate, high-octane fuel for the body. In the deep winter, a spoonful of honey was like lighting a match in your stomach. It was used sparingly, often as a medicine or a special treat for the children, but its presence in the larder was a sign of a truly successful household. You can almost taste the thick, floral sweetness on your tongue, a sharp contrast to the salt and smoke of the rest of the room. It is a reminder that even in the harshest environments, there is room for sweetness. The hum of the Longhouse is different in the storage areas. It is a quiet, heavy sound. The mass of all that food acts as a sound absorber, making this part of the hall feel even more still and protected. You find a spot to sit near a grain bin, feeling the cold air from the floor, pits mingling with the warm air from the rafters. It is a perfectly controlled environment. You realize that the Vikings had basically invented the walk-in refrigerator and the commercial smoker 1,000 years before they were invented. They just used rocks and wood instead of stainless steel and electricity. There is a profound elegance in their solutions. Historians often point to the Viking teeth, found in archaeological sites as evidence of their diet. While they certainly had some wear and tear from the grit in their stone, ground flour, they were surprisingly free of the tooth decay that plagued later, more civilized societies. Their diet of high protein, high fat, and fermented foods was actually very healthy for their teeth and their bodies. They were a people built for endurance, fueled by a diet that was perfectly tuned to their environment. You look at the hanging meats and feel a sense of pride in their ingenuity. They took the raw, harsh products of the North and turned them into a banquet of survival. You think about the winter sharing that happened between houses. If one family's larder was running low, the village would step in to ensure no one starved. This social safety net was the final layer of the internal warmth. The food was the community's collective property in a way, a shared resource that ensured the village, as a whole, would see the spring. You feel the strength of that connection, the warmth of knowing that your neighbor's full rafters are a protection for you as well. It is a world of radical interdependence, where the survival of the individual is tied directly to the survival of the group. The smoke from the hearth continues to curl around the hanging hams, a slow and steady process of transformation. You realize that the fire isn't just a heater, it is a worker. It is constantly laboring to protect the food, to dry the air, and to flavor the world. You watch a single trail of smoke as it wins its way through a gap in the rafters, heading out into the cold night air. It carries with it the scent of the Longhouse's wealth, a signal to any traveler that this is a place of life and abundance. Inside, the warmth is secure. The fuel is ready. The village is fed. As you move back toward your sleeping furs, you feel a deep sense of satisfaction. Your belly is full. Your body is warm. And you know that there is more than enough food to see you through the dark months. The Longhouse secrets have been revealed to you one by one, but this one, the secret of the internal fuel, is perhaps the most visceral. You wrap your cloak around you, the smell of the smoke on the fabric now reminding you of the delicious meats hanging above. It is a comforting thought to fall asleep to. You are tucked into a world of abundance, protected by the earth, the fire, the animals, the wool, the people, and finally the harvest. You close your eyes, and the image of the rafters stays with you, a ceiling of silver fish and golden grain. It is a beautiful, heavy, and protective sight. The cold of the north can do its worst, but it cannot touch the warmth that has been stored in these walls and in these bodies. You sink into the furs, the rhythmic breathing of the village, acting as a background to the quiet, steady process of digestion. You are turning the summer's sun into winter's heat, a biological miracle that happens every night in the heart of the Longhouse. The night is long, but the larder is full, and the warmth is absolute. You are safe in the belly of the village, and the ice is just a ghost outside the door. The darkness of the Longhouse, once a heavy and absolute blanket, begins to thin with a strange, ghostly quality. You wake up on your platform and notice that the light coming through the smoke hole in the roof is no longer the sharp, frozen silver of the winter stars. Instead, it is a pale, watery blue, the color of a robin's egg found in a nest of wet grass. This is the seventh and final secret of the Viking village. The endurance of the spirit through the final winter rites, and the arrival of the spring thaw. You have lived through the darkest months, sheltered by the turf and the fire, but now the house itself seems to be holding its breath, waiting for the world outside to crack open. You hear a new sound, one that hasn't been present for many months. It is a slow, rhythmic tap of water hitting the stones outside the door, the sound of the deep snow finally losing its grip on the roof. The thaw has begun. You sit up, feeling the familiar itch of your wool tunic, which has become a second skin over the long winter. You look at the hearth, where the fire is being kept low today. This is a time of transition, a period the Norse called the long wait. If you think waiting for a late delivery is frustrating, imagine waiting for a star to return to the sky after it has been missing for months. A mainstream historical fact that anchors this moment is the celebration of JL, or Yule, which marked the midwinter turning point. While the world was still frozen, the village would gather to sacrifice to the gods for a good harvest and the return of the sun. But even after the festivities, the hardest part of the winter remained. The weeks when the food was lowest and the woodpiles were nearly gone. It was a test of the community's planning and the resilience of the house itself. You move toward the center of the hall, noticing that the air feels different today. It is still cool, but the humidity from the byre and the steam from the cooking pot have been joined by a faint, crisp scent of wet earth drifting in from the entrance. Historians still argue whether the Norse viewed the spring as a time of pure joy or a season of profound anxiety known as the hunger gap. This was the period when the winter stores were exhausted, but the first shoots of the spring crops were still weeks away from being edible. You look up at the rafters, where only a few lonely strings of dried fish remain. The abundance of the early winter is a memory, and every meal now is a careful calculation. You find yourself smiling at the thought that a Viking's version of spring cleaning probably involved eating the last of the bog butter and hoping the cows would start giving milk again. before the week was out. The rituals of this time are quiet and focused. You watch an elder woman take a small bowl of fat and a bundle of dried herbs. She moves through the hall, touching the timber posts and the stones of the hearth, murmuring words that are as old as the mountains. This is a rite of protection, a way of thanking the house for its service and asking the spirits to stay for another year. A quirky and fascinating tidbit is the tradition of the sun wait. In many northern villages, children and young adults would climb the highest nearby hill on the day the sun was expected to first clear the horizon. They would watch for the first sliver of golden light, and when it appeared, they would race back to the village to announce the rebirth of the world. You can imagine the excitement of that moment, the first touch of true solar warmth on a face that has known only firelight for 5 months. It was the ultimate signal that the Longhouse had done its job. The village had survived. You walk toward the byre, where the animals are noticeably more restless. The cows are tossing their heads, their hooves clopping against the stones with a frantic energy. They can smell the change in the air long before you can. They know that the grass is waking up beneath the snow, and they are tired of the dry hay and the cramped stalls. You realize that you feel the same way. The Longhouse, which felt like a palace of warmth in December, is starting to feel a bit small in March. You could call it a touch of Longhouse fever, though your modern version probably involves more scrolling on a phone and less shoveling of manure. You run your hand over the neck of the lead cow, feeling the heat of her body. She is a survivor, just like you. Together, you have held the line against the frost, and now you are both ready to step back out into the light. The sound of the house is changing. The silence of the deep freeze is replaced by the music of moving water. You hear the slush thump of a large shelf of snow sliding off the turf roof and hitting the ground outside. The thick walls, which have been frozen solid for months, are beginning to soften. You notice a few damp patches on the interior planks, where the moisture is seeping through the turf. This is the one time of year when the Longhouse requires the most maintenance. You have to ensure the drainage gullies are clear, and that the weight of the melting snow doesn't bow the rafters. It is a labor of love, a final service to the structure that has kept your blood liquid during the dark times. You think about the sun bread that is being prepared by the hearth. This is a special loaf made with the very last of the fine flour, shaped into a circle to represent the returning sun. It is a small, golden promise of the warmth to come. When you take a bite, the flavor is rich and earthy, a concentrated taste of the summer that was and the summer that will be. You find yourself laughing quietly at the idea that the sun is finally back to do its job, probably having spent its winter vacation somewhere much warmer while you were busy huddling with the goats. But there is no bitterness in the thought. The sun is a returning hero, and you are ready to welcome it home. As the day progresses, the light through the smoke hole grows stronger. It hits the floor in a bright, rectangular patch, illuminating the dust motes and the texture of the clay. For the first time in months, you can see the colors of the hall clearly. The reds of the wall hangings and the deep browns of the oak beams are vivid and real. The fire in the hearth looks pale in the presence of the daylight, a reminder that the hearth is a substitute for the sky, and now the original has returned. You feel a sense of profound relief, a loosening of a knot in your chest that you didn't even know was there. The Viking villages never froze. Mystery is simple. They didn't just have good houses. They had a profound belief that the light would always return. You move to the door and push it open. The air that rushes in is cool, but it lacks the sharp, killing edge of the winter wind. It smells of melting ice, wet stone, and the distant, briny scent of the fjord. You step out onto the threshold, your boots sinking into the soft, gray slush. The world is a mess of mud and melting snow, but it is the most beautiful thing you have ever seen. You see the first patches of dark earth appearing on the hillsides like the skin of a waking giant. You realize that the Longhouse is no longer a fortress. It is a gateway. It has carried you across the frozen sea of the winter and landed you safely on the shores of spring. The village is coming to life. You see your neighbors stepping out of their own turf mounds, blinking in the bright light like owls. There are no words needed. A simple nod of the head or a wave of the hand is enough to acknowledge the shared victory. You have all made it. The children are already running toward the slushy fields, their laughter ringing out in the still air. You think about the humor in how everyone looks a bit more weathered and woolly than they did in the autumn, but there is a rugged dignity in that appearance. You are a people who have stared down the Arctic and won. You are the masters of the long, dark night. You look back at your Longhouse, its green turf roof still partially covered in white. It looks like a natural part of the landscape, a small hill that just happens to have a family inside. You feel a deep gratitude for the thick walls, the smoking hearth, the breathing animals, and the heavy wool. Every element of the house played its part. You realize that the secrets you have discovered are not just architectural tricks. They are a philosophy of life. To survive the cold, you must be thick-skinned like the turf, warm-hearted like the fire, and connected to others like the wool in a loom. It is a lesson that will stay with you long after the snow has vanished. The sun finally clears the peak of the mountain, spilling a flood of gold across the village. The light is warm on your skin, a sensation so intense it almost feels like a physical weight. You close your eyes and let the sun wash over you, feeling the last remnants of the winter chill evaporate from your soul. The Longhouse has done its work. The fire can be allowed to die down to a few glowing embers, and the doors can be left open to let the spring air circulate through the hall. The cycle is complete. The village has moved from the world of the hearth back into the world of the sun. As you stand there, you hear the distant cry of a returning bird, a sharp, clear note that pierces the silence of the thaw. It is the final punctuation mark on the story of the winter. You feel a deep, peaceful exhaustion, the kind that follows a great achievement. You have survived the Viking winter, and you have learned why the villages never froze. It wasn't magic, it was the incredible, humble power of earth, fire, and community. You take one last deep breath of the spring air, feeling your lungs expand with the freshness of it. The journey through the Longhouse is over, and the world is waiting for you. Now, let the image of the sun on the melting snow linger in your mind. Feel the warmth on your face and the softness of the spring breeze. The Longhouse is behind you now, a safe and silent memory of protection. The heavy wool of your cloak feels lighter. and the weight of the winter has fallen away. You are standing in a place of peace, where the seasons move in a slow, eternal circle, and the light always finds its way back home. Let your breathing slow down, matching the steady, rhythmic drip of the melting ice. The world is quiet, the fire is resting, and you are exactly where you need to be. As the light fades into a soft, golden dusk, let your thoughts drift away like the smoke from the hearth. There are no more chores to do, no more fires to tend, and no more cold to fight. You are safe in the knowledge that the cycle will always turn, and the warmth will always return. The history of the Longhouse is a story of survival, but it is also a story of rest. You have earned this peace. Let the silence of the village wrap around you like a soft, mossy blanket. Your journey through the Viking winter is complete, and the dreams of the spring are waiting to take you the rest of the way. The shadows are growing long and soft now, blurring the edges of the world into a gentle, velvety gray. You feel a deep sense of contentment, a quiet joy that hums in your bones. The secrets of the Longhouse are yours to keep, a legacy of warmth that you can carry into your own life. Whether the world outside is frozen or blooming, you know how to find the hearth at the center. You know how to build the walls and how to weave the wool. You are a survivor of the great North, and the spirit of the village is part of you now. Sleep comes easily when the sun has returned and the heart is full. The last of the daylight is disappearing behind the mountains, leaving a trail of purple and orange across the sky. The air is cooling, but the earth beneath your feet is still holding on to the warmth of the day. You find yourself drifting toward a state of perfect stillness, a place where time has no meaning and the only reality is the gentle pulse of the world. You are tucked into the history of the village, a part of the long, unbroken line of those who have seen the winter through. The stars are beginning to appear, but they are no longer cold. They are the lights of a new season. The Longhouse stands silent behind you, its work finished for now. It will wait for the next winter, ready to wrap its people in its earthy embrace once again. But for tonight, it is just a quiet hill in a landscape of light and water. You feel your eyelids growing heavy, the rhythm of the thaw acting as a final, soothing lullaby. The world is safe. The village is warm. The winter is gone. You are free to drift into the deepest, most peaceful sleep, carried by the current of the returning sun. The story is told, the secrets are shared, and the warmth is yours forever. As you settle into this final, tranquil space, feel the tension leave your body entirely. Your shoulders are heavy, your heart is slow and steady, and your mind is as clear as a mountain pool. The images of the fire, the turf, and the wool fade into a soft, glowing mist. You are moving into a dream, where the sun never sets, and the air is always sweet, with the scent of spring. The Longhouse has carried you home. Now let the rest of the world fall away. There is nothing left to do but breathe and be. You are safe. You are warm. You are loved by the history that holds you. The final light of the evening is gone now, leaving only the soft, ambient glow of the stars. The world is a place of deep, restorative shadows. You are sinking into the earth, just like the foundations of the house, anchored and secure. The secrets of the Longhouse are whispered in the wind, but you no longer need to listen. You know them by heart. You are the warmth that remains when the fire goes out. You are the life that persists through the ice. Sleep now, with the memory of the sun on your skin and the peace of the village in your soul. Now, as the warmth of the village remains in your bones, let the images fade softly into the background. Your journey through the Longhouse has come to a gentle close, and the world is still. The heavy turf walls have protected you, the central fire has nourished you, and the community has held you close through the longest night. You can feel the safety of that ancient sanctuary even now, a quiet strength that lives in the silence between your breaths. The stories of the North have been told, and the secrets of the ice have been shared, leaving you in a place of deep, undisturbed peace. Let your mind drift, like the lazy smoke rising toward the stars, moving beyond the timber beams and into the vast, quiet expanse of the night. There is no rush, no noise, only the soft, steady rhythm of your own heart. You are part of the long, rolling history of the earth, a spark of life in a beautiful, frozen world that is now waking up to the spring. Everything is in its right place. The animals are resting, the wool is folded, and the hearth is a soft, glowing memory. You are free to let go and sink into the velvet depth of a dreamless sleep. Your breathing is slow and shallow now, a mirror to the stillness of the fjords. The world outside is a distant whisper, and the world inside is a haven of warmth. You have survived the winter, and you have found the heart of the village. As you drift further away, let the final echoes of the Longhouse fade into the soft hum of the night. You are safe, you are warm, and the morning will bring the sun. Sweet dreams of the high north, where the fire never truly goes out, and the spirit is always home.